Welcome back to the second and final part of our story. Last we left Lyra, she and Viscount Silas Ashworth had shared a moment of profound, undeniable intimacy in the dilapidated rose garden. But their world is about to be violently shaken. Can Lyra endure the ultimate judgment from a world obsessed with surfaces? And will Silas's ice-cold loyalty protect the woman who gave him his sight back? Get ready for high drama, deep-seated angst, and the powerful climax where all secrets and all past tragedies will finally be revealed. Part 5. The Society's Venom. The Viscountess of Blackwood, the Dowager Aunt Agnes, was not accustomed to being kept waiting. She sailed into Blackwood Manor like a ship in full distress, trailing her nervous, scandalized maid and an air thick with entitlement and outrage. She had endured the humiliation of Lyra's extended, unchaperoned stay for weeks, but the arrival of the wedding invitations, printed in stark, black script and bearing Lyra's plain name beside the Viscount's title, had been the final affront. Lyra had learned to use her invisibility to her advantage, but today she was glaringly visible. She and Silas were taking a solitary tea in the small parlor, a room where the light was always soft, when Aunt Agnes burst in. Narration. The rumors were vicious. They said he'd chosen me out of pity, that I was his nurse, his grotesque companion. His own family came to save him from his folly. "You cannot marry this creature," his aunt hissed right in front of me. Silas's face turned to stone. "The only creature I see," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "is a woman so ugly on the inside, she assumes the world values only the shell. Leave, now." He defended me without ever seeing my face. Aunt Agnes, a woman whose entire identity was built upon the flawless shell of society, found Lyra sitting opposite the Viscount. Lyra was laughing softly at one of Silas's dry, acerbic observations about the stupidity of the London season. The Dowager Aunt stopped dead, her eyes widening in undisguised disgust as they swept over Lyra's face. "Silas, thank heaven, I have come in time." Aunt Agnes's voice was high and frantic. "I have heard the most appalling whispers. The whole ton is beside itself. They say you have chosen a bride that you intend to marry. This." She did not use Lyra's name. She pointed a gloved finger at her, treating her like an object displayed in a curiosity shop. Silas, who had been relaxed, his head tilted towards Lyra, instantly became a figure of chilling, lethal stillness. He could not see his aunt's expression, but he heard the calculated cruelty in her voice, the inflection of pure social condemnation. "You are intruding, Aunt," Silas stated, his voice flat but possessing an unnerving undercurrent of menace. "We were discussing the menu." "The menu! You cannot be serious." Aunt Agnes swept closer, dropping the formal pretense. "Silas, dear boy, you are blind. You are vulnerable. They say you've chosen her out of pity, that she is your nurse, your grotesque companion, paid to describe sunsets." She leaned down toward him, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper meant to exclude Lyra, though Lyra heard every syllable. "You cannot marry this creature. Look at her. She is not only scarred, she has no family connections, no dowry, no sense. She is beneath the Ashworth name, and when you produce an heir, society will point and laugh." Lyra felt the blow land with physical force. Creature. It was the accumulated venom of her entire life, condensed into one word, spoken by the voice of his own family, right in front of him. The external world, the society's venom, had intruded into their careful sanctuary of truth. Lyra's carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter. She focused on the cold handle of her teacup, trying to shrink back into the invisibility that was no longer an option. Silas, sitting mere inches from Lyra, did not need sight to understand the weight of the insult or the devastation in Lyra's stillness. His face, already defined by sharp grief, turned to stone. His pale, sightless eyes seemed to look directly at his aunt, cutting through the shadows. He spoke, and his voice was low, clear, and dripping with ice. "You mistake the terms of our agreement, Aunt Agnes," he said. "Miss Beaumont is here because of her honesty, a quality I find conspicuously absent in the women of the ton." He pushed himself up to stand, slowly and deliberately, putting his considerable height and presence between his aunt and Lyra. He was protecting her, not with a touch, but with the cold, immovable fortress of his authority. "You came here to save me from folly, did you not?" he continued. "You came to prevent me from bringing shame upon the Ashworth name by choosing a woman who is perceived to be ugly." Aunt Agnes nodded eagerly. "Yes, dear boy. You need a wife who reflects the dignity of the family, A beauty. Not this. Silence, Silas commanded. The single word cracked like a whip. The only creature I see, Silas said, his voice lowering to a terrifying register of finality, is a woman so ugly on the inside, she assumes the world values only the shell. You assume that because I cannot see Lyra's exterior, I am incapable of perceiving the ugliness of yours. He paused, letting the full weight of his contempt settle upon his aunt. Lyra Beaumont has described the world to me with more light, more depth, and more compassion than I ever saw with my own eyes. She is the only truth in a world full of pretty lies. Her courage, her perception, and her heart are precisely the qualities I require in the mother of my heir, and they are all the beauty I will ever need to see. He took one slow step toward his aunt. You are dismissed, aunt. Do not darken the doors of Blackwood Manor again until you can apologize to the future Viscountess for your appalling lack of manners and your staggering vanity. He pointed toward the door with a sweeping, uncompromising gesture. Leave. Now. Aunt Agnes was stunned into silence. She was defeated, not by argument, but by the sheer, unwavering force of his loyalty. She gathered her dignity, hissed one final impotent sound of fury at Lyra, and stumbled out, the silk of her dress rustling in furious retreat. The door closed, leaving Lyra and Silas alone in the stunned quiet. This scene established the stakes and showed Silas's unwavering loyalty. He had defended her without ever seeing her face, prioritizing her inner worth over his family's shallow social demands. Lyra rose from her seat, her eyes hot with unshed tears. She walked towards him, and for the first time, she initiated a touch. She didn't reach for his face or his hand. She simply placed her hand on the black wool of his sleeve, a quiet, desperate acknowledgement of his protection. Silas, she managed, her voice thick. You did not have to. I did, he interrupted, turning his blind gaze toward the warmth of her hand on his sleeve. I did, Lyra. Because you are worth defending. Do you understand that? Your value is not negotiable, and it is certainly not subject to the approval of a woman who values porcelain more than life. He moved his arm, trapping her hand gently against his bicep. They look at me and see tragedy, he said, his voice quiet now. They look at you and see a creature. We, Lyra, look at the world, and we see the truth. That makes us the dangerous ones. His loyalty, born of his own profound need for truth, had cemented their bond, deepening her internal conflict. The fearful realization that this relationship, born of cynical necessity, had become the most precious, vulnerable thing in her life. Part 6. The Shadow of the Past. The confrontation with Aunt Agnes had been a victory, but like all victories, it left a residue of exhaustion and vulnerability. Lyra and Silas moved through the rest of the day in a strained silence, the echo of the society's venom still clinging to the corners of the vast manor. Lyra, unable to settle, wandered the house after dinner, her restlessness eventually leading her to the music room, a place she rarely visited. The door was closed, but a devastatingly beautiful sad melody was spilling from beneath it. Narration. I found him in his music room playing a devastatingly sad piece on the piano. It was the anniversary today, he said. The fire that took my sight and my sister. The full weight of his grief filled the room. This was the source of his ice. He wasn't a beast. He was a man drowning in loss, and I, the invisible wallflower, was the only one he had let see it. Lyra pushed the heavy mahogany door open just enough to see him. Silas was seated at the grand piano, his back to the door, his long fingers moving with practiced, sorrowful grace over the keys. The piece was turbulent, laced with bursts of frantic energy and long, desolate moments of quiet. It was the sound of a man battling a ghost. She stepped inside and closed the door softly. He did not stop playing, but he knew she was there. He knew her scent, the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle, quiet tread of her feet. He played the final, heart-rending chord, and then his hands rested on the ivory, still. It was the anniversary today, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the icy command she was accustomed to. It was a voice stripped down to raw, exhausted honesty. Lyra moved slowly, quietly, taking a seat on a low bench near the fireplace. She said nothing, knowing that he did not need her to fill the silence, but simply to share it. 5 years, he continued, speaking to the empty music stand. The fire that took my sight and my sister. He finally turned to her, his profile sharp against the faint glow of the small fire. The full weight of his grief filled the room. It was a heavy, suffocating presence, suddenly explaining the impenetrable fortress of his temperament. Lyra knew the basic facts of the tragedy from the society papers: the Blackwood wing consumed by flame, the rescue of the Viscount, the loss of his younger sibling, Lady Clara. But to hear it from him so stripped of drama, so raw in its simple fact, made the story devastating. Clara was 10, Silas murmured, his voice cracking slightly. I had told her to wait for me in the library in that wing. There was a draft, and I told her I would light the fire for her before I came back with my father's ledger. He laughed, a single, bitter sound. I returned and saw the smoke. I went in. I found her. But by then, the smoke was too thick. The structure was collapsing. I only remembered the sound, the roar, the heat, and then the absolute silence. His hand reached up, tracing the fine scar that ran along his temple. They pulled me out, saved the air, but my sight was gone, and Clara was gone. And every day, Lyra, I can still hear the sound of the fire and the sound of my own panic, and I can never see her face again. This was the source of his ice. His coldness was not arrogance. It was the terror of letting anyone get close enough to see the guilt and the unmanageable pain that consumed him. He was not a beast. He was a man drowning in loss. Lyra watched him, her own history of isolation and unseen pain giving her a unique capacity for understanding. The society women would have fled from this vulnerability, or attempted to fix it with platitudes. Lyra understood that sometimes pain only needs a witness. I had a sister, too, Lyra said softly, surprising herself with the admission. Not to a fire, but to the slow, brutal poverty that consumed my father's health. Alice. She used to pretend my birthmark was a map to a treasure island, charting its jagged lines with her small finger. She paused, remembering. When she died of a fever 2 years ago, I felt like the map was worthless, that the world was just flat, plain, and empty. I lost my only compass, my lord. I became merely the girl with the stain, with nowhere to go. She was sharing her own stories of loneliness, meeting his grief not with pity but with resonant understanding. Silas slowly turned his blind gaze fully toward her. He listened not to the description of the event, but to the texture of the loss in her voice. You speak of invisibility, Lyra, he said, the flatness leaving his tone, replaced by an earnest, almost desperate connection. But your honesty is what makes you the only person I can truly see. Everyone else sees the title, the wealth, the disability, and they tell me what they think I want to hear. He pushed himself up from the piano bench and, relying on his hearing, walked deliberately toward her bench. He stopped directly in front of her, his knees almost touching hers. You told me the brutal truth of your mark, Lyra. You defended the honesty of the sunset. You faced my aunt's venom and held your ground. And now you sit here quietly and admit to your own emptiness. He reached out, his hand unerringly finding her shoulder, a reassuring, solid weight. You are the only person who has looked past the ashes of Blackwood and seen the man beneath. And I, the invisible wallflower, was the only one he had let see it. Their bond deepened into something unbreakable. It was a shared sanctuary built on the mutual recognition of profound, unseen suffering. They were two broken halves, a man without sight, a woman without acceptance, who had found wholeness in each other's unwavering truth. I don't need a wife, Lyra, he said, his voice a low, heavy promise. I need you. Part 7. The Proposal of Truth. The shared grief in the music room had stripped away the final layers of formality and defense. Lyra and Silas were no longer employer and companion, but two souls bound by mutual honesty and deep, profound sight. Lyra was no longer the wallflower, and Silas was no longer merely the beast. They were simply two people who saw each other in a world that insisted on blindness. The following morning, Lyra was in the library, attempting to find a copy of a rare botanical text Silas had mentioned when she heard his approach. This time, there was a different quality to his steps, a deliberate, steady rhythm that suggested resolution. She turned as he stopped before her, standing in the aisle between two towering bookshelves. The light in the library was muted, painting long, dusty stripes across the wooden floor. Silas did not speak of books or sunsets or the follies of his aunt. He reached out, his hand moving tentatively, and found both of Lyra's hands. His touch was firm, enveloping, and focused. He did not stand to address her as the lord of the manor. Instead, he released one of her hands, and then, slowly, deliberately, he sank to his knees. Narration. He knelt before me, not on one knee, but as a supplicant. He held my hands. Lyra, he said, I have seen more of the world through your words than I ever did with my eyes. I have seen sunsets and paintings and the pettiness of society, but most of all, I have seen you. Your courage is your beauty. Your honesty is your grace. Your heart is the only thing I will ever need to see. Marry me. Lyra's breath hitched in her throat. She looked down at him, this powerful man who had chosen to make himself vulnerable at her feet. He was not on one knee as a traditional suitor. He was kneeling as a supplicant, a man offering his entire broken self in exchange for her truth. He held both of her hands tightly, his grip warm and absolute. His pale, sightless eyes were fixed on the air where her face was, but she knew he was seeing her with the only vision that mattered. Lyra, he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer. I came to this seeking an honest woman, a means to an end. But you have given them something I had decided was impossible. Hope. He leaned forward slightly, his head bowed. I have seen more of the world through your words than I ever did with my own eyes. I have seen the dying embers of the sunset and the cruel laughter in my aunt's face. I have seen the precise, aching sorrow of the music room. He squeezed her hands once hard. But most of all, Lyra, I have seen you. His voice was thick with an emotion she had never heard him use, a deep, unvarnished love that resonated with the raw, simple truth they had built between them. Your honesty is your grace. Your mind is a brilliant, unforgiving landscape. Your courage is your beauty, he declared, defining the word on his own terms. You stood before me, the creature of my family's scorn, and told me the simple, agonizing fact of your existence without demanding my pity. That, Lyra, is the only perfection I can honor. He looked up, and for the first time she saw a flicker of the old arrogant Viscount mixed with this new, humble man. I need you to be the mother of my children, but I need you more to be the voice of my world. I need you to be my witness, Lyra, my true north. He finally produced a small velvet box, holding it up between their joined hands. It contained a simple gold band, no large diamonds, no frivolous settings, the ring of a man who dealt in essence, not glitter. Your heart is the only thing I will ever need to see, he whispered. Marry me. The ultimate emotional payoff flooded the library. It was the proposal based entirely on who she is. Lyra, who had spent her life feeling unworthy of even a glance, now felt fully known, deeply loved, and fiercely chosen by the most powerful, perceptive man she had ever met. The tears she had held back during the years of mockery and the recent torrent of familial contempt now spilled down her face, but they were tears of pure, blinding joy. Yes, Silas, she managed, her voice breaking. Yes, I will marry you. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of relief and fierce possession. He did not ask her to help him up. He used their joined hands as leverage and rose, pulling her up with him until they stood chest to chest in the silence of the library. He reached up, his thumb brushing away a tear that traced a path across the unmarked side of her cheek. Then, his hand moved across her face, finding the edge of the birthmark, his fingers resting gently on the tight, scarred skin. I know exactly what you look like, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I know the map of your pain, and I know the grace of your mind. They are inseparable. He reached for the ring, slipped it onto her finger, and then he leaned down. It was not a kiss of passion, but of deep, solemn reverence. His lips touched hers, a promise of a life built on absolute, unyielding truth. And in that moment, with the simple gold band on her finger, Lyra realized that for Silas Ashworth, the blind Viscount, she was not just accepted or endured or even loved. She was beautiful. He had called her beautiful for the first time, defining the word entirely on his own terms. Part 8. The Wedding and the Sight. The wedding day arrived under a cold, clear winter sky, precisely 2 weeks after the proposal in the library. The invitations had caused a stir in London unmatched by any event of the season. The society that had scorned Lyra was now forced to attend, drawn by a toxic mix of morbid curiosity and the undeniable prestige of the Ashworth title. The ceremony was held in the small ancient chapel on the Blackwood estate, a place that smelled of old stone and polished brass. Lyra, dressed in a modest gown of heavy cream satin, walked down the short aisle on her proud but anxious father's arm. Narration. At our wedding, as we spoke our vows, a strange thing happened. The society guests saw only the scarred girl and the blind lord. They saw a tragedy, but as he placed the ring on my finger, he leaned close. "I know exactly what you look like," he whispered, "and you are more breathtaking than any sunrise you ever described to me." We were the only two people in the church who truly saw. Lyra could feel the collective gaze of the assembled guests, the judging eyes of Lady Amelia and the stiff, disapproving figure of Aunt Agnes, who had been coerced into attending by her husband. They saw only the scarred girl and the blind lord. They saw a tragedy. They saw two people broken by fate, making a cynical, desperate bargain. They saw a story to be whispered about for years. Lyra reached the altar. Silas, impeccably dressed and radiating a chilling calm, reached out his hand. His fingers unerringly found hers, a warm, solid promise. As the ceremony proceeded, the words of the vicar, "to have and to hold for better or worse, in sickness and in health," sounded different to Lyra than they would to any other bride. For them, these were not abstract promises. They were a mutual reality already fully embraced. When it came time for the exchange of rings, Silas took her hand, his thumb resting gently on the pulse of her wrist. He paused, his head tilting toward her, his blind eyes fixed on the point where he knew her face to be. The entire chapel held its breath, waiting for the formality to conclude. But as he placed the ring on her finger, he leaned close. The act was one of such profound, quiet intimacy that it excluded the entire room. His breath was warm against the sensitive skin by her ear, and his voice was a low, devastating rumble meant only for her. "I know exactly what you look like," he whispered. "I know the exact placement of every line, the texture of the light on your hair, the geometry of your defiance." He paused, letting the full weight of the words settle. "And you are more breathtaking than any sunrise you ever described to me, Lyra, because you are real, because you are true." Lyra's vision blurred with fresh tears. The ironic twist landed with full force. He could not see the light streaming through the stained glass, nor the expensive dresses of his guests, nor the perfect unmarked side of her face. Yet in that church filled with hundreds of sighted people, they were the only two who truly saw. The blind man saw the courageous heart and the uncompromising spirit. The scarred woman saw the guilt-ravaged soul and the profound need for truth. The vicar concluded the ceremony. "You may kiss the bride." Silas turned, cupped Lyra's face in his hands, his thumbs resting near the edges of her birthmark, in a gesture that acknowledged and embraced the flaw. He kissed her deeply, with the full possessive love of a man who had finally found his sight. As they turned to face the congregation, Lyra felt an extraordinary sensation of strength. She was not leaving the altar as the pathetic, scarred girl who had sought a cynical bargain. She was leaving as the Viscountess Ashworth, fully known, fiercely loved, and finally visible. She saw the guests. Aunt Agnes's face was a study in defeated outrage. Lady Amelia looked utterly baffled, unable to reconcile the magnificent, confident pair before her with the pitiful tale she had crafted in her mind. Lyra smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips that finally felt unburdened by shame. Silas leaned his head close one last time as they walked down the aisle. "What do you see now, my love?" Lyra squeezed his arm, her truth-teller's heart brimming with joy. "I see a room full of people, Silas," she whispered, "and I see that they are all, tragically, blind." And so we leave Lyra and Silas, the Viscount and Viscountess Ashworth, standing together in the light of a love that is felt, not seen. Thank you so much for listening to this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, and if you believe that true love is always found on the inside, please do us a huge favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next unforgettable tale. Comment below. We want to know, what part of Lyra and Silas's journey spoke to you the most? Was it the initial confession, the vulnerable moment in the music room, or the powerful ending? Until next time, keep seeking the truth behind the surface.